I would say 10% of the time Ustad was quoting Hafiz. Mostly he's quoting Maulana the most, and then he's quoting other Sufis, whether Shabastari or Bidel or other Sufis. But Hafiz had a special place, and I have to say, he knew more Hafiz than most Afghans. They knew more. They were studying Bidel and memorizing Bidel more, and he knew all Bidel, but he liked Hafiz very much also. And he even said to me that Hafiz, he was a challenge, he like a paradox when he was young. You probably know this, and that he was very, because he was a religious person, he was very challenged by this statement of Hafiz, and he went deeply into Hafiz for this reason, and he ended up very much appreciating Hafiz. But some of Hafiz's poetry is actually very straightforward. Not too many, but some of them. This one is pretty straightforward. So he says, Ay be khabar, bikush ke sahib khabar shavi. Ta rah rao nabashi, kai rahbar shavi. You guys know this poem? Yeah, so Ustad would recite this poem. Is, oh, clueless one, oh, you who have no information and understanding, try to become a master of understanding. See, because here Chabad means in the sense of spiritual understanding. Unless you become a traveler of the road, how will you ever become a guide? So you have this in English. You see, this is nice in Persian because the lines are resonating more. So you have Rahrao, the traveler, and Rahbar, the guide. Says, the next line he says, Dar maktab haqa'iq پیش ادیب عشق هان ای پسر بکوش که روزی پدر شوی. So now we know he really is talking about a Sufi thing, because he says, in the school of the spiritual realities, and in front of the teacher of love, meaning God or the Pir, try, O son, so that one day you will become a father. Dast az mese wujud چو مردان را بشویی تا کیمیای عشق بیابی و زر شوی. Like the real adults of the path, the men, he says here, meaning the real people of the path, he says, wash your hands of the copper of existence, so that the alchemy of love is what you find and you become gold. So this is a very an allusion to the process of alchemy, kimyoi, where if it's a physical alchemist, they're trying to turn copper into gold. But in the case of the Sufis, they call this process kimyoi. And you probably know that Al-Ghazali wrote a book about kimyoi sadat, so the alchemy of happiness and of solace. And this famous idea for Hafiz, very common idea throughout Hafiz's poetry. دست از مسی وجود چو مردان راه بشوی تا کیمیای عشق بیابی و زر شوی. خواب و خورت سی مرتبه خیش دور کرد، اونگاه رسی به خیش که به خواب و خور شوی. So this is the part where we start to get a better sense of the relationship to Ramadan. He says sleep and eating, your sleep and your eating, have kept you far from your true level, the martaba, your true spiritual level. You will reach your true self when you get beyond sleeping and eating. So this, we were talking earlier about Ustad and how he really was, like you say, whether it was Ihsan John, you are his son, whether it was about his energy, but in the case of the fasting, like when you think of the namuna, the guide who is like the example, frankly, it was amazing. You know, he's much older than everyone else. He's fasting to him is no big deal. He looks forward to it. Even if it's not Ramadan, he's fasting several times every month anyway. Huh? Yeah. The older he got, it seemed to me, the more he was fasting. Food, he would restrict, certainly when he was fasting, but even at other times he would enjoy it. He would say that was one of the blessings of the world, and the food in your house had the baraka of the house, huh? So it was delicious, and so he wasn't that he was against food. Yeah, so there has to be a balance. Now for us Westerners, frankly, it's uncomfortable. Like, you know, already when we look at this poem, it's not hard to understand the language, because sometimes Hafiz's language is very beautiful and magical and this outside of the easy comprehension. But here we have ideas that are easy to understand. But they invite us to examine some assumptions we have. See, especially as Westerners. See, I think one thing is habit. If you were raised in a culture where there's fasting and people get used to the idea of fasting, it's not so hard, for example. And in a culture where one is not used to fasting, it is more difficult. On the other hand, when I went to Peshawar in 1986, and I remember in the house I was in, they were saying, this is the sacred month of Ramadan. It is so beautiful. Everyone there in a spiritual state. So we're driving through the bazaar and I'm seeing fist fights. I said, hey, what's going on over here? They said, oh, look, there's a fight going on here. And the driver, he was a Tajik, he says, this is Ramadan, don't you know? Like, everybody's in a bad mood. They're always getting into fights. And the guy I was with, Toshi, he was saying, oh, quiet down. This, our guest, be polite with our guest, don't tell him. But it's true, you see, it's not hard for some people to do the fast, but it is hard for many people to do the fasting. And I remember also Etimadi Sahib, I started fasting before I was Muslim. Before I met your father, I was a student of Humayun Etimadi. And he fasted absolutely. I think so many of the older Afghans, they had become so used to that. Speaking of what, Leonard, Norman, do you still have the painting that Etimadi did? Can you bring it so people can see it?
Sure, absolutely.
So, because it's very interesting. You've seen the painting I did as his student, but Norman actually bought one of Etimadi Sahib's paintings. It was one of his miniature paintings. They would be very interesting to see. But coming back to him, to Etimadi Sahib, he fasted not as much as your father, but he fasted a lot. And it was just like it was like a very easy to accept kind of maybe it's like a little bit like the idea of attention. Like if you just put your attention on something, it's not so hard. It's good for you. You can more easily embrace it. And then all of us know that as the month goes on, do you not go through phases? I mean, I go through phases, and towards the end of Ramadan, it's very true what he's saying here. You know, if you can go, because isn't it true that during the fasting month you're also not going to sleep as much? For obvious reasons, huh? That if you're going to eat sahari, you're going to have to get up very early. And but whether you like it or not, whether you're going to be awake, the assumption is that you may not always need as much sleep as you think you do. Maybe you'll have to make it up, because certainly after Ramadan, people may then hopefully go back into their sleep, or certainly some people, they have the luxury. When I was in Pakistan, frankly, I saw a lot of people sleeping through the day. And they were shortening the day and making the fasting easier also. But in America, we can't really do that so easily.
Mostly in Middle East the same way, of religion.
It's what?
In Middle East the same way.
Yeah. So, now in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, obviously, Arabia itself is so hot, it's not like they were trying to escape. It was just the normal custom that they would get out of the heat of the day. They would take a nap. They would rest in the heat of the day. Huh? But if you were living in Sweden or something, you don't really have to worry about that. But in the case of Pakistan, it depends on the year, because sometimes in Pakistan it was really temperate climate, and sometimes it was very hot. 1986 was very hot, and Itimadi Sahib and I went there in, I think we went there in 89, 90, and it was still very hot, and he was fasting. I was not Muslim yet, and but I was fasting with him. And many of the people we went to see, they were not fasting, just because that was the situation, that class of people. They were not fasting so much. Huh? And I don't care either way. But I remember here, do you remember when I was having dizzy spells? And it was very funny, because I said to your father, I said, what am I supposed to do? He says, well, if you're sick, you shouldn't fast. It says in Quran. He said you should see a doctor. It says, but try, but if you can't do it, then there's something wrong, and you should listen to a doctor. And I went to the doctor. They said, you have to drink, because you have a vertigo problem, positional vertigo. So it was very funny, because I assumed everybody knew the rules, and I went to the mosque one day frankly, with a cup of coffee, because and I thought, everybody understands, if you're drinking something, it means that you are not fasting for some good reason. But one of them, not Qari Sahib, but somebody else, they pulled me aside and said, yes, Abdul Hai, but you should do it privately. I said, who says you should do it privately? In Quran, it doesn't say do it privately. It says you are exempt from it. Why should you do it privately? It says, so people will not think bad things. I said, okay. So then I did it privately after that, you see. But then I got over the problem. It went away. Problem went away. I'm talking about other years. It went away. And last 10 years, I've not had that problem. So, but anyway, it's just getting used to this cultural stuff and trying to distinguish that from the benefits of the fasting. But here, what he says is very clear, isn't it? خواب و خورت ز مرتبه خویش دور کرد آنگاه رسی به خویش که به خواب و خور شوی. So there's this idea, that Rumi was talking about in terms of zikr, that you have an essence, huh? So he in many places and in many this idea that your real nature would become shining, huh? And whether it's in the case of the zikr, is the fasting a kind of zikr? Yeah, because isn't every one of the ibadat zikr? And so if he says Rana ala qulubihim bima kanu yaksibun, it could apply as well. Yes, could apply here as well. Agreed? So there's a verdigris or a rust on the mirror from what they have been accumulating. Now many of the Zahiri commentators, they say like what they've been sinning or something like this. But in the case of the Sufi commentators, they say, well, wait a minute, it's more than that, because the root in here is kasb, which is to gather, to acquire. It really means to acquire something. And so this would be including the acquiring of habits, negativities, and therefore the fasting for the dervish and the Sufi is not just from the food and the water. Huh? Certainly, advice I received from Ustad is it's much more than that. You're trying not to, it's also in Quran and Hadith, you're trying not to, if you become negative, isn't it true? You're trying to let that go. Am I right? Yeah. And so the fasting here gets even harder because now we are stressed out. Many of us, we get up getting less sleep, we're less patient, and yet we're supposed to be less negative too. And what is the reality of this versus the appearance of this? Like, isn't it a little bit difficult? I think it's a little bit difficult, a little bit challenging, but you know it's for a month, huh? You know that this is like a sacred month. And isn't it true that this sacred month is so powerful that isn't it true that at the end of the sacred month, if you go to the mosque, what kind of miracle can you make happen if you go to the mosque at the end of this sacred month? You can cancel enemies. You can make peace with enemies. Am I not correct? Isn't that true? In fact, you should try to do that. Isn't that true? Because the month was so sacred and you have purified yourself, you go to the mosque and you're looking for somebody, and hopefully you take advantage of this and you go and you let go of the hatred or the anger. So this is all part of the package, isn't it? So so this is very interesting observations, huh? And coming back to this poem, Gar nur ishq haq ba dil wa janat افتد بلا که از آفتاب فلک خوبتر شوی. گر نور عشق حق به دل و جانت افتد بلا که از آفتاب فلک خوبتر شوی. Well, so there's now the idea that if God's loving light should be cast into your heart and into your soul, by God, I swear that you will be more splendid than the sun in the sky, more beautiful than the sun in the sky. And so, personal experience. So what's it like for you guys? Like for me, towards the end of Ramadan, this starts. There's a kimya. There's an alchemy that's happened. It was hard. Some of it was very hard. I was very disappointed, often in my own reactions. the negativity I could muster or experience, the impatience during the first part of the fasting, a transition from physical difficulty to emotional difficulty to physical accommodation and emotional settling down, so that it seemed like what was really going to happen in Ramadan was sort of after, into about the third week, is where I start to really see a big difference happening. Yeah, this is a very strange thing. Like, you would think that the cumulative lack of sleep, but the fact is, it's like, let's say you were smoking and suddenly you quit smoking. Isn't it true you would be annoyed for a while? And I remember many years ago, I lived in Marshall, and I decided to quit smoking, and my neighbor ran out of coffee, and he came and felt he had permission to go in my house and borrow some coffee, and I almost got into a fist fight with him. And of course, luckily at the last minute, I realized this is because of nicotine. This is not because of anything real that's going on. And so I apologized to him, and we had dinner together. But I think with fasting, it's like that, where food is like a habit. We're so used to it when we want it, and when we first stop, it's a little bit uncomfortable. Now, unless you're constantly fasting, see, I think the wisdom that Ustad was following is he was fasting regularly, and his system was benefiting. And Faisal says after 2 weeks, he suddenly has a lot of energy. But one of the things we find out about Ustad is he often had a lot of energy. And it's worth asking the question, is there some relationship to the spiritual path he's following, which includes fasting? I think there is. I think there's these reserves of energy, and when you read normal literature from, say, especially in the West, we're told that we really need, a minimum of 8 hours. Is that still the thing, Norman? Yeah, and so there's not a lot of room for, in other words, if you take a general sampling of people and you leave out let's call it the orientation, like let's say spiritual orientation to having less food and less sleep. Let's say there's less food and less sleep because you're a truck driver. Well, in that case, you'd have less sleep but more food, huh? But you know what I'm trying to say is that there may be something in the domain of intention that makes the fasting of this annual fast, and fasting in other cultures, because fasting is certainly not unique to Islam, but it's different in Islam because you break the fast in the evening. Right? And my experience is exactly like what you're saying, but I have less. I do have physical energy, but I find that this is when I really started to understand zikr years ago, when I became Ustad's murid, and he connected the getting up early in the morning and the fasting to the advantage in zikr. And as I said, I was not happy with myself when I would start the fasting, because I would think, how can somebody as negative as I am benefit from this? But anyway, just follow the program, see? Just do what is being recommended, is what I was thinking. So he says, do this, let's try to do it, let's see what happens. Worst case, it's only a month. And I'd already fasted in a different context, but which had less waking up at night. So Ustad is more waking up at night, plus the fasting. It's a little bit different. And sure enough, in about the third week, I seem to have become really detoxed, we could say. Right? Isn't it detoxification? So I don't mean food as a toxin, but it does have toxins in it, in the sense of certainly it is energy is going into the digestion of food. Food has byproducts that may be affecting the way we think and the way we feel, and suddenly we're orientating ourselves in a different way. And I'm always surprised, and I have another suspicion that you may have already also observed, is that if you even intentionally decide to do the fasting, even when you are sick, like when I had the vertigo, the fact that you had this intention suddenly joined you to however many of the billion people are fasting. In other words, there was like do you ever feel that way? There's like a mass of energy around Ramadan itself. But I'll just repeat the English to where we have gotten so far. So he says, O clueless one, make an effort so that you can become a master of knowledge and wisdom. Until you become a traveler of the road, how will you ever become a guide? In the school of the divine realities, with the teacher of love in front of you, try, O son, so that one day you may become a father. Like the real men of the road, meaning the real people of striving, wash your hands of the copper of existence so that you find the alchemy of love and you yourself become gold. Apologize for differences in the translation from 10 minutes ago or whatever it was, but your sleep and eating have kept you from your high station, from the high level that you were intended for. You will reach the true reality of yourself when you are without sleep and food. If God's loving light should be cast into your heart and your soul, by God, I swear that you will be more splendid and beautiful than the sun above. So this is where we got to so far in this poem, and we were talking about Ramadan, and some of the ideas that have surfaced include the kinds of changes that we first go through, and some of the talk was about maybe physical discomfort the first few days. For me, I think I would say maybe some emotional discomfort increasing in the second week or something. Physical discomfort starts to subside, and so does emotional discomfort, and suddenly there's maybe a detox from food, as a habituation of food, and now there's sort of maybe some kind of disengagement from a habitual pattern, and all of a sudden many people describe finding energy. How is it for you?
Not until the second week, at least.
Okay, yeah. So what happens in the first and second week?
Well, kind of irritability and headaches, things like that, physical symptoms.
Yeah, see, I agree with that. Not everybody experiences the same thing, but my experience is more like what you're talking about. Although I'm not given to headaches, but I'm definitely given to irritability. which is disappointing, when you're supposed to be sitting in the Sufi chair. But you have to, but you have to be honest and be realistic, because what we're trying to say is there, it's a command in the religion, but other than the command of the religion, what is the benefit of it? Experientially, can we ask ourselves what is the benefit? And Hafiz is saying the benefit is that you will find yourself, And I was mentioning how in so many places Rumi advises us to find ourselves through this clarification process. And the question is fasting not zikr? Yes, because all worship is zikr, and therefore there is a verdigris upon their hearts from what they have been accumulating, whether it be negative thoughts and habit patterns, and these suddenly surface. And isn't it true that later in the fasting there's a change? And so what happens after week number 1 and number 2?
Well, typically I think there is a detox that takes place, so that things start to smell a little brighter, and all the sensations are a little more clear.
That's very interesting. So you're saying that the normal senses
Are dull. Yeah.
They now seem brighter, and food is, so it's not just the anticipation of the food.
No.
It's actually a change in the ability to taste the food, and so there's a habit is broken, and suddenly there's a freshness in perception. And then what?
Well, then it's kind of the challenge from there on is to really honor the time, because what I've found in the last few years, especially with this job that I took on about 2 years ago, is it's very easy to just kind of gird myself as if Ramadan wasn't taking place, just to kind of be protective and not really let it be as disruptive as it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So that, getting up early certainly helps, but I think the evenings are the challenge, because the evenings should be more holy, and often I'm just getting home late like any other night. And
Yeah. So there's this in the East, as you know, because you've been there. It's wonderful. The whole world agrees that Ramadan's going to be different. It's not going to be. Nobody else is going to be at your job when you get there in the morning either, right? And some of them are going to be asleep a little bit at the job in the daytime, and everybody's going to be fine with that. Isn't that true? Yeah. So there's an accommodation. So in a way, we could arguably, it's a little bit harder to do the fast in a modern Western context. And some people have gone so far as to object to the description of twilight, especially if they live in the northern reaches, where their day might suddenly be 20 hours long, and so they may decide through ijtihad, through guessing, they're deciding that they're just going to do the fasting according to the hours at Mecca, for example. Am I right?
Yep.
Because the context has changed, But not everybody would accept that, would they? But again, coming back to the idea, there's a beginner. Are the beginners who are learning prayer, are they going to do all the prayers at the very beginning? I don't think so, We're not talking about children anymore. We're talking about what if it's an adult in the Western world, what if they're fasting. Normally, it's not advisable that they do it all. When, do many of you know Bilal Haidt? Imam Bilal? So you're aware of his knowledge and his studies in Islam and his mastery of those studies. And he said that actually when they brought Islam into Africa and so forth, they slowly introduced the prayer, the historical record. And they didn't make them do it. They said it was something where the wisdom was to slowly introduce it so that over a period of time they would adopt it. But I feel that way about fasting too. If somebody can't do it, you do have the Quran it says, do what you are able to do. What about the qira'at, like reciting late into the night? What does the Quran say about that, like what you're supposed to do?
The Quran asks that this you should read it on tajweed, the qat.
Yeah, but the Quran says you should recite the amount that is easy for you. You see, it doesn't say you must recite it until you fall unconscious. It says you must recite however much is easy for you. In Quran, huh? You can see, I can show you. It says recite as much as is easy for you. Yeah, I'll show you. It's in Quran. So it's said many places in Quran. Meaning hopefully it's easy for you to first of all, in Ramadan, it means in the moment. Like if it's easy for you to read 5 minutes and then take a break, because maybe you should take a break. Easy means easy for you to understand. Not easy because you could just keep reciting it, but I think what God means is, are you paying attention? Are you understanding? You better recite what you are able to understand, and not just become a parrot or a person repeating something because you're trying to race through the Quran to get into that stairway to heaven, you know. So I think that's really what the issue is. That, see, any of these things, I just don't think of them as being as rigid. I do believe in the benefits of fasting, of prayer, but I find that with Westerners, you have to approach this very carefully and maybe slowly but surely to people to see the benefit for themselves. Because if they see the benefit, they're inclined to do it. There's people who talk all the time about not having spiritual experience, and if you say to them, try this just for one time, try it for this 1 month, but not the first time, say try it for this weekend. And Ramadan is coming in 6 months, try it for this weekend, try it now for a week. You see what I'm saying? So that they build up. I did it before I converted. You're aware of that. Because I wanted to be sure I was going to be able to do this. I was reading this, I said, this sounds like hell to me. You know, and when I was in Peshawar in 85 and 86, before I did fasting with Itimadi, what happened is that I just thought, you know, how can anybody possibly do this? I'm just seeing all of the difficulties they're having. But I was willing to try it. And I think it was very wise to try it out beforehand.
You allow it.
Well, absolutely right. You may find it easy at one level is 5 minutes, and then what's easy later is 1/3 of the night.
And that it remains easy and gets easier. This is important.
Yes, exactly. So recite what is easy. And in those areas, God often says, I don't wish this to be a burden.
Right.
So he's using words that clearly are contrasting the idea that this should be a natural adaptation, and it shouldn't seem unwarranted or impossible, but it's something that one could learn to do. So he says, Ay be khabar bikush ki sahib khabar shavi. Ta rao nabashi kai rahbar shavi. در مکتب حقایق پیش ادیب عشق هان ای پسر بکش که روزی پدر شوی. دست از مس وجود چو مردان را بشویی تا کیمیای عشق بیابی و زر شوی. خواب و خورت ز مرتبه خویش دور کرد اونگاه رسی به خویش که به خواب و خور شوی. گر نور عشق حق با دل و جانت آفتد بالله که از آفتاب فلک خوبتر شوی. Now we go to the next line, huh? یک دم غریق بحر خدا شو گمان مبر که از آب هفت بر با یک موی تر شوی. یک دم غریق بحر خدا شو گمان مبر که از آب هفت بر با یک موی تر شوی. It says in this next line, for a moment become drowned in the ocean of God. And don't imagine that from all of the water of the seven seas, you will even wet one hair. Often we see this in other lines of his, huh? So he says, آشنایان راه عشق در این بحر عمیق غرقه گشتند و نگشتند به آب آلوده. You guys know this poem, this other poem? So there's many poems where he has this idea that this is a metaphysical immersion, and that's why he's explaining that you will not, in the second one that I just mentioned. It's very beautiful because he says آشنایان راه عشق. The knowers or the swimmers, but the knowers on the road of love or the swimmers on the road of love have drowned in this deep ocean. آشنایان راه عشق در این بحر عمیق غرقه گشتند و نگشتند به آب آلوده. They were completely drowned, but they were not stained or affected by the water. See, they were not made wet by the water. Huh? So this idea, again, in this line here, where he says, for a moment, become immersed and drowned in God's ocean. And don't imagine that from the water of the seven seas, you will even wet one hair. Now, have we heard lately about the ocean of God? Huh? We have in the poetry recently about God's luminous ocean and so forth. And as you'll see, the poem is taking us a little bit more in this direction. He says, از پای تا سرت همه نور خدا شود در راه ذوالجلال چو به پا و سر شوی. از پای تا سرت همه نور خدا شود در راه ذوالجلال چو به پا و سر شوی. So he says, from head to foot, you will become completely the light of God on the path. What is Zul Jalal? Full of majesty, huh? On the path of the one, the possessor of majesty and power. Huh? When you become without foot and head, because he was talking about head to foot, and now when you become without foot and head. Huh? So it's intended to rhyme with those. Huh? And so again, we have the idea of becoming completely from head to foot full of God's light, huh? Manifesting God's light. So like when he says, در حریم عشق نتان زد دم از گفت و شنید زان که اونجا جمله آزا چشم باید بود و گوش. This is Hafiz also. So he says, in the sanctuary of love, one cannot dispute or argue. One cannot gossip or dispute, because there, all of the members of the body, all of the parts of the body, they either must become eyes or ears. So there's this transformation that he's talking about. And in this poem, he's taking us from the idea of drowning in the ocean of God, not being outwardly affected, which is what many people expect, some kind of fundamental outward transformation. This is an inward transformation that he's talking about. And so I've referenced one other similar line, and in the second case, in this case where he's talking about from head to foot, you'll completely become the light of God. Well, that's only possible if God decides to become that light for you, isn't that true? When will that happen? When one hair even does not become wet when you are immersed in the seven seas. See, in other words, somehow you will go into this immersion, and it is not about some external form of transformation. We'll continue that way. We'll finish the poem, and then we have a little bit of time to discuss it. There's some important lines that connect us also to the last class. So he says, Wajh Khuda. Wajh Khuda agar shawadat manzar nazar zin pas shaki namonad ke sahib nazar shavi. وجه خدا اگر شودت منظر نظر زین پس شکی نماند که صاحب نظر شوی. So he says, if the divine aspect of God becomes the object of your vision, thereafter, there was absolutely no doubt, will remain that you are a Sahib Nazar. Sahib Nazar is a high rank, isn't it? What we were talking about is somebody who is a master of spiritual seeing. Is Nazar. Manzar is very nice in Arabic because it can be a verbal noun. So it can be like a verbal noun like as in a sight. You see, it can be, in other words, it can be a verbal noun that is subjective or objective because just like in English, like if I say in English, a sight for sore eyes, or what a wonderful sight, clearly it's an object, and I'm describing a relationship to an object, correct? On the other hand, if I say, my sight beholds this lovely sight, you'd be criticized for redundancy, wouldn't you? But it's not actually redundant, is it? It's a different usage of the same word, correct? So the same thing with manzar in Arabic. It can mean the same way it does in English. So in fact, it could therefore refer to the hadith in question. Which hadith? The hadith of Nawafel, where God says, my servant does not stop approaching me with excessive devotion until I love her or love him. And when I do, I become her hearing, her seeing, etc., or his. I always include, because this is the Western world, I include the women in here, you see. But really, this is all in the masculine, but we understand it means a person. Do you understand what I'm saying? That you have nazar and manzar. Now, the manzar can mean a similar thing to like mazhar. You see, like a place where you are seeing. That's why you could say the object of the sight. So let's do it the conventional way. Conventional way again was if the divine aspect or the face of God, because really here Vajra means face, if the face of God becomes the object of your sight, thereafter there remains absolutely no doubt that you are the master of seeing, master of sight. Is that important in Sufism and in Islam? Yes, it is, isn't it? It's very, very important. It's the stage of the Muqarrabun. You see, so again in this poem, Hafiz is referring, and throughout his poetry he will be referring to this stage of the mystic who wishes to see God directly. Bunyad hasti tu chu zir o zabar shavad, dar del madar hich chu zir o zabar shavi. So here he's saying, when the foundations of your existence become topsy-turvy, have nothing in your heart that would cause you to become topsy-turvy. What is this referring to? In Sufism, what is the idea here?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. When the foundations of your existence become topsy-turvy.
So like a mawzu?
Yes, but also the idea of berangi. One of the safest things is he's talking about the afterlife, the transition to the afterlife, and of the practices, not just of the Sufis, but for sure of the Sufis, if they can. Like, isn't it true most Muslims, they will say, La ilaha illallah? Yeah? It's better, yeah? But the Sufi, they want to be aware at that time. If they're lucky, maybe they will be sick and they will die in their deathbed. Yes? If they're not lucky, maybe they will be driving down the freeway, they will be dead, okay? Either way, it would be better if they were drunk. Well, on the freeway, that raises the odds, doesn't it? So it would be better if they were aware of God. And the best way to be aware of God is to be empty of oneself, yes? So he's saying, he's comparing physical topsy-turviness to spiritual topsy-turviness and how to avoid it. Because for sure, isn't it true, for sure the foundations of your existence are going to become topsy-turvy. Yes, for sure. Everybody. Correct? But not for sure your heart will become topsy-turvy. That depends on the work you do in this life, spiritual work. It depends actually on a changed perception. Your perception has changed. And it's like tasting honey. You were saying this morning. It means the difference between believing in honey and you're tasting honey. So if you're tasting honey, it means you know how to become empty. When they come to kill you, when death comes to kill you, what if no one is there? They can only take what they can take, Your old shriveled body, The Ramat is we're like similar. I always say, oh, Ramadan, he reminds me of somebody who's going to die, because he's getting old. But see, then I think, oh, wait a minute, how old are you, Ramadan?
65.
Yeah, you see, we're very similar age. So I said, Ramadan has more gray hair. I bet I have more gray hair too, you see. So the point is, we should be happy, huh? We should not be scared. Are the Sufis scared of death?
No.
Is the animal the Sufi lives in scared of death? Yeah, the animal will resist. If you become sick and you go to the hospital, the animal will try to live. Yes? Yes. But not the heart. If the heart is aware, the heart doesn't it become a pana? Doesn't it become a refuge? So the important thing, all the Sufis say, try to become mature so that you can have the ability to what I was quoting to earlier before we started this. Jumla alam zin ghalat kardand ra kaz adam tarsand wa an amad ana. Yeah, you get it? So the whole world has made this mistake in following the way, which is that they were afraid of non-being. They were afraid of perishing, and yet this was their only refuge. And technically they were afraid of non-being, meaning of emptiness. They were afraid of losing themselves, terrified of fana, actually. Because some people, when I counsel them, they say, I go into zikr and now things are happening and I'm scared, I want out. Say, too late, buddy. But no, really this happens. People are like, I said, do you realize how many people would pay like $100,000 to be in your situation? But they want out because it's so scary at that point. You see, the point just before diving in. So he says, Rumi says, the whole world is actually afraid of going back into non-being, but actually that's where you came from, is non-being. So he says, they made this critical mistake. They were afraid of non-being, and it was their only refuge. See? So he's saying, he's referring to this, you see. So again, coming back to you, Abdurrahim John, you see, if I translate this for you, he says, when the foundations of your existence become topsy-turvy, we say topsy-turvy, have absolutely nothing in your heart that could become topsy-turvy. See? So be empty in your heart, so that in fact there will be nothing there in fact nothing will change, because are the people who experience fana, are they sometimes described as already dead? Yes, Rumi, Ibn Arabi, not in a like Fear of the Walking Dead or something like this. Is a whole different thing. This is a thing where there's a pleasant side to being dead, and the Sufis are experiencing the pleasant side to being dead. If there's a loss of consciousness, a permanent and complete loss of consciousness at death, then this would be a very worrisome situation. But if your experience in Sufism, while remaining completely a normal human being with all of the ups and downs and pleasures and displeasures, but nevertheless cultivating a detachment from bodily existence, it is possible to search and verify that consciousness in and of itself is not actually dependent upon bodily existence. So in the modern terms, if I was trying to encourage somebody to try meditation, I would say, well, you would be surprised what you can find out. Because there are tools in the laboratory that you haven't seen yet. So you cannot prejudge the laboratory because you have not seen the microscopes that they have in that laboratory. First go into the laboratory and see for yourself. Then come back and we can have this conversation. See, the problem is most Westerners, we call them sometimes reductionists. Huh? So they say that consciousness is simply the activity of the brain. We agree, there's usually a brain there. But in fact, there's not always a brain there in another sense. Huh? So in the sense of shared consciousness appearing in many places and having some definition, in fact. Having diversity, meaning non-uniform expressions of consciousness appearing in diverse manifestations. So these are the kinds of things that the Sufi explores experientially. And that's what Hafiz is saying to you here. Now his last line, he says, Gar dar sarat hawai wasal as Hafiz باید که خاک درگاه اهل نظر شوی گر در سرت هوای وصال است حافظ باید که خاک درگاه اهل نظر شوی. If you have it in your head that you desire union, Hafiz, you better become the dust of the dargah. What's the dargah? The hanakah. You better become the dust of the hanakah of the people of vision. So emphasizing vision again. I must say, in another manuscript, he doesn't say Ale Nazar, he says Ale Hunar. So this, in Hafiz, you find different manuscripts. But this manuscript I prefer for obvious reasons. The lines prior, he was talking about becoming a master of vision. And this last line, he's saying that you must become the dust of the Hanakah, the dust of the place of worship of the people of vision. And what he's saying there, he's talking about contagion. What's contagion? Where there may be like an unseen force that in medieval times it couldn't really be explained, right? And all kinds of theories existed about not knowing why people were suffering from these illnesses, am I right? It was supernatural forces. In fact, it was a simple case of contagion. Well, in spirituality, there is a case of contagion where you can spend time with a teacher and have any of you been with a spiritual teacher where you feel affected by the company of the spiritual teacher? Many, if not most of you, huh? Because I was talking about anyone who is Sahib Jazba, they have this capacity, and it can even be two dervishes who happen to be both very sincere and they feel the transpersonal quality. Huh?